So today, what I wanted to cover is, you know what, we're about to enter a market that, if you believe Greg Janicki and you believe some of the pundits and economists, why can I not say that word, y'all? You know who I'm talking about. Those smart people are predicting is we are about to get pretty busy this summer, okay? And multiple offers are likely to be a high probability. So what I wanted to do is give you, equip you with some tools, techniques, some little tips and tricks in presenting your offers that can help you to win in a highly competitive environment. Okay. Right now, we are still in a very, very strong seller's market. For just about every home out there, there are multiple buyers. Inventory levels are very, very low. Homes that are quote unquote cherry are getting multiple offers. Okay, I was helping several of you yesterday and took inventory within one of my own Docs Plus accounts and realized that I had written 5. I was in the process of writing the 5th offer for the same client. Okay, that tells me that she's going after the cherry houses. Your clients are likely to be doing the same thing. So you need to be able to balance 2 things in this equation. You are trying to get, one, your client the best possible deal that they can get. So in other words, get the most house for the least amount of money. But at the same time, you've got to have the highest probability of your offer being accepted. Those 2 things can be inversely proportionate to each other. So your job is to try to balance those 2 things so that you one, still get your client a great deal, but you don't completely abandon the fact that the seller doesn't want to get a house, doesn't want to get an offer $100,000 under their asking price. I actually helped one of you write one of those this morning. Okay, so it is a balancing act, and you are the consultant, you are the expert. Your client is rely upon you to understand some of these things to be able to get them to the closing table. So with that, let's go ahead and we are going to dive straight in. Wait, somebody's in the chat. Good morning, everybody. By the way, feel free, use the chat. If you have questions, I'll try to monitor it. If y'all have questions, either raise your hand on the little thing within the Zoom tool or put something in chat. I'll read it. And if y'all raise the red flag to me, I will stop and try to answer all of your questions if possible. All right, anybody got anything before we roll into this? Questions? Everybody excited? All right, here we go. We are talking about winning the bidding war, everybody. All right, so the things we are going to talk about today, ways to make your offer more attractive to a seller. So the caveat to today is everything that I am suggesting to you, none of this is done unilaterally by you. Okay, these are your techniques, but it's not something that you would just unilaterally do without explaining it to your client, having your client's full understanding and knowledge of the techniques that we're about to do. So having said that, you're going to do this with only your buyer's understanding. And also, this is huge, y'all. The next big thing is you would never, ever, ever submit an offer without first talking to the listing agent. This is a personal pet peeve of mine. If you don't know and you don't understand the relationship business to understand enough to know that what our jobs is 20% computer work and legal work and 80% relationships. Okay, so what you're trying to do with this, reaching out to that listing agent, is you're trying to start establishing that relationship. Okay, that relationship is what's going to help you tip that balance more so than just what's on the contract that you write. All right. So having said that, when you are reaching out to the listing agent, a great technique is is to ask them, what is the seller looking for? Other than the obvious, what their net is, how much money they're going to walk away from the closing table. Is there anything that the sellers are looking for that can help me to write a winning offer for you, Mr. Seller's agent or Mrs. Seller's agent? Okay, that is the open-ended best line of the planet. And it opens the door for them to tell you what it is their sellers are looking for. Let me let you in on a little secret. Quite often, the agents will tell you more than they probably should. Okay. To be honest with you, you need to remember you have a financial duty of confidentiality with your clients. So remember, the listing agent does too. So oftentimes sometimes they'll hold their cards real close to their chest and not tell you anything. Other times they will give you the keys to the kingdom and they'll say, my client is looking for above asking price. They want appraisal gap. They're not willing to pay anybody's closing costs. So make sure that that's zero. They need a closing date of, May 13th at 2:00. Guess what? If you know that and you can write that into your offer, you're giving them one less reason to decline your offer. So again, if you haven't called the listing agent and asked these questions, you're operating in a vacuum and you can't help your client to write an offer that meets both the seller's needs as well as theirs. Okay. And remember, you're also establishing that relationship. Worst case scenario, when you call the listing agent, the least thing you could do is say, hey, I need to get the disclosures from you. Remember, you've got to have the disclosures to be able to write in the offer. If they're not posted on the MLS, you got to get them from them somehow. And again, you're there to establish that relationship. All right. And I was telling a couple of you guys yesterday when I was coaching some folks that I have literally had agents that when you establish that relationship and you and create that working environment that works well with a listing agent, listing agents will choose to do business with you. If everything else is equal on the multiple offers that they get, they'll choose to work with the agent that is the most professional, that they have the best relationship with. And if that can be you and you can do that by reaching out to them, why wouldn't you? You know what I mean? If you ever submit an offer and you have no idea whether the listing agent is male, female, experienced, what their first name is, what brokers they work for, if you haven't established that relationship, you're doing your client a disservice. Okay. Have I beat that horse? Is the horse dead at this stage? I hope so. Okay, continuing on. Now we're going to get into the actual no kidding steps, the things that you can do, the actual no kidding steps to be able to win in a multiple offer scenario. Okay, the first is probably way too obvious. You want to bid the highest net to seller. Okay, submit the highest bid and you can win the bidding wars. That's not always the easiest thing to do because your clients may have caps. They may have lending pre-approval limits that they must stay within. They may have their down payment and closing costs to be thinking about, and that might be their budget. So not always the easiest, but it is by far the best. Bid the highest net to seller. Work very hard to try to do zero seller paid closing costs. If your client needs closing cost assistance, it sends a message that they may not be the best qualified or that they may not have a large amount of cash reserves to be able to do this. So that sends a little message about how much risk that they can absorb. Offer higher earnest money. Okay, question to the masses, what is the minimum earnest money amount that you should consider for an offer? Jason's holding up one finger. Who else? Minimum one. In a strong seller's market, Eric's got two fingers up. I would say in a strong seller's market, one is the minimum, but realistically, if you want to have a good fighting chance, it needs to be more than one. Okay. Two would be probably in a strong seller's market, two would be the recommendation. Okay. If your sellers can at all do it, try to make that possible. All right. After the highest earnest money, next we're going to talk short or no due diligence period. All right. Danger, danger, Will Robinson. It can be very effective, but at the same time, you never necessarily want to.
Jay, I'm sorry. Can we go back?
Sure.
Took me a second to come off mute. What? The minimum.
1% of the sales price of the house. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Yeah, well, when did we start doing that? I thought there was no minimum.
There's no such thing as a minimum by law or regulation or anything like that, but there is kind of a standard. And if you and the standard is pretty much 1% of the sales price of the house. If it's going to be less than that, it sends a pretty strong message that maybe this person is, if they can't do earnest money, that the very concept of earnest money is right there in the name. It's earnest. It's how serious the buyer is. If the buyer's not serious enough to be able to put at least 1% down and risk that amount of money, then that's sending a message that they're pretty risk averse, and maybe these are not the people that a seller would want to go with, right?
Yes. I understand the concept. I just thought that there was never a minimum. That's what so when they put up one, I thought they were saying like $1.
No, I'm sorry. 1% of the sales price of the house.
Okay, because that was honed in during one of my classes, that there is no minimum.
There is not, but there is kind of the norm, if you will. It's the same thing as you can't say 3%, that the standard commission is 3%. We don't do standard commissions. We do customary. It's different. Okay. All right. So after we short or no due diligence, so you never necessarily want to expose your client to never doing an inspection, but you can do some things that will do a shorter due diligence period or a substitution for a due diligence period, which is this: property sold with a right to request repairs. All right. Put a bookmark in that. We're going to come back to it and talk to it here in just a minute in much greater detail, but let's move on, and I'm going to come right back to there. All right. Anytime you are doing a deal, there are some disclosures into buyers purchasing in a strong seller's market. There's an exhibit that exists in the GAR documents, and that is very helpful to make sure that you are cautioning your buyer clients on some of the concerns about buying in a seller's market. I'm going to show you those also in greater detail in just a second. All right. So let's talk about the shorter closing date. You can do a short closing date because you're obviously, sellers typically want to close fairly quickly. But that is not always the case. So one way to do it is to express flexibility with the closing date. So you put a closing date on the offer, but you might be able to tell them, hey, we might be able to close shorter, or if the seller needs it, they could do some a longer closing date if they're trying to find a new home to move into. Okay. Has anybody had that experience where sometimes a longer closing date works much better because the sellers haven't found the property that they're going to move into? Happens to me all the time. Okay. And that's especially true with a new construction build. Before I go off of that screen, let's talk about how much possession after a closing date can you potentially offer to a seller to stay in the house? Does anybody know?
No, I mean, I have. Isn't it like less than 30 days?
Okay, we've got Megan saying 30 days. What are you saying, Eric? How many? 10 days? Okay. What is, Keisha, go ahead.
They just said, oh, sorry, that's 10. But I just saw something yesterday that said no, the seller prefers 0 due diligence days.
Yeah. Seller can prefer that all they want. Whether or not they get it or not is a totally different question. Go ahead, Eric.
You're talking about the extension on a closing?
No, not the extension on a closing, but post-closing possession. So if you were a buyer and you wanted to offer the seller to stay in the house after the
gotcha.
closing date, does anybody
Yeah.
know how long you can extend that offer to them?
Yeah, you can go 60 days.
Ding, bingo.
Max.
60 days is the max. Can you mute again, please, Eric? I got background noise. Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. Remember, most lenders, FHA, VA, conventional, all of them are owner occupy, typically loan types, which means that they're only giving that loan to somebody who's going to live in it. So they usually have a little clause that they make you sign at the closing table that says you will move into the house within the next 60 days and you will occupy it within 60 days of the closing date. So therefore, you can't do a post-closing possession and giving them, 3 months when the reality of it is your loan program is only going to allow you 60 days. Okay, so always remember that. All right. So next, this is to, I think, the next point is on financing and appraisal contingencies. The shorter, the more attractive they are going to be to a seller. Again, a little bit dangerous if you were to do 0 days of financing and 0 days of appraisal contingency, but it is possible with certain lenders and with certain loan programs, okay? For example, who amongst us has had a scenario in which your folks were already through underwriting, had completed underwriting, maybe they did it for one house and that house fell through and now they're going to a new house. They've already had underwriting approval. All they need is a new address to be able to submit with that. In those scenarios, is it okay to do 0 days of financing contingency? Survey. I've stumped the audience. Votes for yes, it's okay. Votes for no. Actually, it is okay. If they are completely through underwriting approval and they have had conditional approval, in other words, they're completely approved with the exception of a couple of conditions. Usually those conditions are the final property and a final appraisal. If they're already through all of those, then underwriting has said these people, their credit is good, their income is good, their documents are good. You can do a 0 day finance contingency. I would be hesitant to do 0 days of appraisal contingency, but that is also possible. Okay. If you feel very confident that the appraisal will come in well above your contract price, you can also do appraisal contingency. But the fact is, it's hard to feel very confident about that. Am I right? All right. Going back to sharing screens. And the reason, so with the financing and appraisal contingencies, the main concern is you got to mitigate that risk. And we just kind of talked about that with the financing and appraisal contingencies, how to mitigate that risk. All right. The cleaner the offer, the better. In other words, if you have almost no or very few special steps or special requests included in your main offer, the better your offer is going to be. So think about it this way. If you're already starting to put into your special steps of your purchase and sale agreement repairs for things or special requests like you want the washer and dryer or the living room furniture, those things are going to send a message that you might be a little bit more difficult to work with. So you want to keep it clean. So setting the expectation with your buyer, there may be a time to ask for things like a termite letter or the washer and dryer, but it's not during the initial offer. Save that for the due diligence period and the amendment to address concerns. Okay, so keep it clean on the initial offer and move forward from there and include those repairs later on down the road. All right. So now we want to talk about the ways in which to improve your offer by choosing the financing techniques that you're submitting the offer with. All right. So first, let's talk about, in order of preference, what is going to be the most desirable type of offer for a seller to accept?
Cash.
Bingo! Cash offers are king. Cash is always going to be the best. All right. So if your client can do a cash offer, God bless America, that is the best scenario you can possibly imagine. If they can't do a cash offer, there are ways to convert what their offer might be, whether it be conventional or other programs, into a cash offer by using such programs as the C21 Easy Sell, Knock, Ribbon. There are several out there, and that is beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but we can always engage in those conversations too. Okay. Next is going to be, of course, conventional loans. Conventional is going to be the next best thing to cash. All right. What is going to be after conventional, y'all? Pipe up. Unmute. Feel free.
FHA.
Bingo. Pretty much a dead even heat between FHA and VA. And again, the reason might be, so why would FHA be less desirable than conventional?
Stricter and less down payment.
There you go. Also, a big one is that FHA amendatory clause. Who can tell me what the FHA amendatory clause is and the VA amendatory clause? Feel free to paraphrase.
I want to say FHA is mandatory to have a warranty. That seller requires a warranty.
No, not true.
I think the FHA one is that it has to appraise
Bingo.
properly. Mhm.
The amendatory clause that is included in both FHA and VA loans basically says, and I'm paraphrasing the legal language, but it basically says, if the home does not appraise for at least the sales price on the contract, then the seller or the buyer cannot be penalized by the forfeiture of their earnest money if the home does not appraise. Okay. So in other words, they can always terminate and get their earnest money back because of an appraisal. That is not the case in the case of a conventional loan. In the case of a conventional loan, if they pass their appraisal contingency and they terminate the contract, they're not getting their earnest money back. But that is not the case with FHA and VA. So for that very reason alone, that is why they place second and third place behind conventional. Make sense? Okay. What's going to be next after a VA and FHA? Well, now we're getting down into the weeds. Anybody ever done a agricultural loan in a rural area? Your next most desirable after VA or FHA is going to be a USDA loan. Again, we don't do a whole lot of these in Metro Atlanta because it's primarily for non-residential agricultural farm type properties. So we don't do a whole lot of that in the Metroplex here. And then the last type of loan program in terms of desirability is going to be any type of loan that has type of down payment assistance program attached to it. So if you've got a first-time home buyer trying to do Georgia Dream or NACA, NACA is the Neighborhood Association Corporation of America. I think I'm remembering that right. Anybody have direct firsthand experience with that?
It's Assistance Corporation of America.
There you go. Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America. There you go. Thank you. Sounds like Keisha's done one or two of these. Good job, girl. You careful, you might become the expert in the office. All right.
No, I've never done one. I just worked with NACA
just-
before.
Okay, well, there you go. All right. So anytime when you are submitting an offer, you're going to want to review your client's financing contingency, their pre-approval letter, and make sure you're tailoring whatever you're putting in your contingency exhibit into what is basically whatever their pre-approval letter says. All right. Essentially, the higher down payment that your client can put down on a home, it implies they're more financially secure, and it's going to be less risk to the seller. Okay, so that is why higher down payments are going to be more desirable. Also, here is a plug to be able to get you to use, not get you, a plug to advocate that you use an in-house lender. Well-known local lenders like Greg, like several others that you may have a partnership with that you may have brought to you from a previous brokerage. Local lenders with a local presence are going to be more desirable and more favorably received than a large mega bank. Okay, if you've got a client that presents to you a pre-approval letter with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, gosh, who's some of the other big names that are out? SunTrust.
Truist.
Truist, thank you. Yes, any of the
Rocket
big mega
Mortgage.
banks. Yeah, there you go. Quicken Loans. Quicken's gotten better, but still, those kind of companies, think about it this way, and here's your selling point with your client is when you're dealing with a big mega corporation like that, you're nothing more than a number to them. You're an account number. If you have to call and you end up getting a calling center, an 800 number calling center, and you're talking to somebody in a foreign country that you can't understand and communicate with, that's a problem. But then you've got somebody like Greg who will literally call your listing agent to tell them how well qualified your buyer is. That's going to be more favorably received. Okay. So always try to advocate to your client to use a well-known local lender like Greg. All right. Y'all, I am not going to get through all of this today, so we might have to pick this up later. All right. And to my last point, ask that lender, any of these lenders, but especially if it's one of ours like Greg, Greg will happily make a phone call to your seller's agent to explain the strength of your buyer client's financials. And that can go a huge, long way to making sure that you win the bidding wars. Okay. All right. Gosh, guys, we are running out of time. Let me see how many more of these I can walk through. Offer to use the seller's preferred closing attorney. All right. Even if it's not our preferred closing attorney. Folks, I'm going to tell you, Luter, Larkin, and Hunter is freaking awesome. They are the best. They will accommodate anything you want to do. And I have firsthand experience with them trying to turn around a closing within 48 hours for me in the last day and a half. They are awesome. They will do everything for you. But if it's going to put you at a disadvantage or your client at a disadvantage to not use the preferred closing attorney, then you don't want to put yourself against, go against that. However, having said that, contractually, who has the right, beyond a shadow of a doubt, to choose the closing attorney that they want to use? Who has that?
The buyer.
The buyer.
The buyer does. So I have a personal pet peeve. I hate seeing these listing remarks that say closing attorney must be Weissman. You can't say that. Don't put that in your remarks of your listing agreement because it's not true. You can't say it has to be. The contract says it's the buyer's choice, not the seller's. Period. Dot. And you can go straight to that paragraph in the document and push that back on your listing agent if you want to. Okay. All right. That is all the time we have for today. I might have to pick this up either next week or if anybody has any other questions or is in the process of writing an offer that you want to explore any of these techniques or explore any of the ones that I haven't got to yet, let's talk about it as you're constructing your offer this week or this weekend. Okay? Everybody good? Last minute questions,
Thank you, Jerry.
alibis? Have a good one, y'all.